Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step softly into the wide, polished streets of Vienna in the 1890s, where the morning light glides across pale stone facades and the quiet clatter of carriage wheels echoes between grand buildings. You move forward slowly as if the city itself has asked you not to rush. There is a rhythm here, steady and composed like a piece of music that never quite raises its voice. And yet beneath all that elegance you sense something more practical, more human, something that might surprise you. You probably will not survive this, at least not without learning how to navigate social rules that are just as complex as any symphony. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights and you find yourself stepping onto the Ringstrasse just as the city is waking. The boulevard stretches wide around you, curving in a graceful arc that feels almost deliberate, as if designed for strolling rather than hurrying. The buildings rise in careful symmetry, their facades decorated with columns, statues, and carved details that catch the early light. A commonly accepted historical understanding is that the Ringstrasse was built after the old city walls were removed in the mid-19th century, transforming Vienna into a modern imperial capital. As you walk, it does not feel modern in the way you might expect. It feels composed, almost staged, like a performance that has been rehearsed many times. You hear the first sounds of the day layering themselves gently into place. Hooves strike the pavement in a steady rhythm. A tram rattles past its metal wheels, producing a soft, repetitive hum. Somewhere nearby a door opens, and you catch the faint scent of freshly baked bread drifting into the street. It mixes with less romantic notes, damp stone horse manure, a trace of coal smoke lingering in the cool air. Vienna, it seems, prefers not to hide its realities completely. You adjust your pace to match the city. No one appears rushed. Men in dark coats walk with measured steps, their hats set just so. Women move with a similar composure, skirts brushing lightly against the ground, gloves already in place even this early. You begin to notice how carefully people observe one another without seeming to stare. It is not intrusive, just constant, as if everyone is quietly assessing their place within the same shared performance. A small detail catches your attention. A young boy hurries past, carrying a stack of newspapers, his shoes tapping quickly against the pavement in contrast to the slower adults around him. A quirky but documented detail from this era is that newspaper culture in Vienna was thriving, with readers often consuming multiple papers a day in cafés, sometimes more for the act of reading than for the news itself. You imagine those pages already waiting on marble tables somewhere nearby, ready to be unfolded and discussed. As you continue along the boulevard, the scale of the buildings begins to settle into your awareness. The State Opera stands with quiet confidence, its arches and statues suggesting both art and authority. Not far from it, the Parliament building presents itself with a different tone, classical and deliberate, as if borrowing the language of ancient Greece to make a statement about order and governance. Historians still argue whether this architectural style was meant to express genuine political ideals, or simply to reinforce imperial power through familiar visual symbols. Either way, as you pass by, you feel its presence calm, imposing, and slightly distant. A carriage rolls by, close enough that you hear the creak of leather and wood. The driver sits upright, reins held steady, his posture as composed as the buildings around you. Inside you glimpse a passenger, perhaps a gentleman on his way to a morning appointment, or someone who has nowhere urgent to be but prefers not to walk. The carriage leaves behind a faint trail of sound that fades quickly, replaced by the soft murmur of voices from pedestrians passing in both directions. You notice how the city invites observation. Every detail seems to linger just long enough to be appreciated. A woman pauses briefly to adjust her glove, her movements precise and practiced. Two men exchange a quiet greeting, lifting their hats with a subtle tilt that feels almost ceremonial. Even the street sweepers working along the edges of the boulevard move with a kind of rhythm, their brooms brushing against the ground in slow, steady arcs. You take a moment to stop Not fully stopping, just slowing enough that you can let the scene settle around you. The air feels cool against your face, carrying that mix of bread, smoke and morning dampness. Somewhere behind you a bell rings softly, marking the hour, though it does not seem to hurry anyone along. Time here feels measured, not urgent. There is a sense, too, that this elegance depends on something less visible. You notice the workers more clearly now, the ones who move slightly faster, who carry crates, who unload goods from carts, who slip in and out of side streets. Their presence is constant but understated, like the quieter instruments in an orchestra that you only notice if you listen carefully. Without them, the polished surface of Vienna would not hold together quite so smoothly. As you begin walking again, you realize that the Ringstrasse is not just a road, it is a stage, a place where the empire presents itself, where architecture, fashion and behavior all combine to create a certain impression, and you, whether you intended to or not, have become part of that impression simply by being here, moving through it, observing it, adjusting your pace to match its quiet expectations. You pass a cafe without entering, but even from the doorway you can see a glimpse of what waits inside. Marble tables, wooden chairs, a waiter standing with composed patience, newspapers already arranged. It feels like a promise of something slower, something that will ask you to sit, to read, to think, or perhaps just to watch. You make a small mental note to return later. It seems inevitable that you will. For now, you continue along the boulevard, letting the city unfold at its own pace. The light grows slightly stronger, casting longer shadows that stretch across the pavement. The sounds build gently, never overwhelming, always balanced. Vienna does not rush into the day. It eases into it layer by layer, as if aware that the hours ahead will be filled with music, conversation and quiet ambition. And as you walk, you begin to feel that you are not just passing through a place, but entering a rhythm, one that will shape how you move, how you listen, even how you think. You follow that rhythm forward without quite realizing where it will lead you next. You keep moving along the boulevard, though your steps begin to slow as the grand facades give way to quieter side streets. The shift is subtle at first. The buildings remain tall and carefully designed, but their ornamentation softens and the street itself narrows just enough to feel more personal. The echo of carriage wheels fades slightly, replaced by smaller sounds. Footsteps, a door closing, the soft scrape of something being dragged across stone. You turn a corner almost without thinking, guided by curiosity more than intention, and the city immediately feels closer. Windows sit lower here, some open just enough to let out the scent of soap coffee, or something cooking gently over a stove. Laundry hangs from lines stretched across courtyards you can only glimpse through arched entryways. Vienna, it seems, has layers, and you have just stepped into one that is less concerned with appearances and more focused on daily living. You are looking for a place to stay, though you have not said it out loud. It is simply understood. In a city like this, you cannot drift forever. Even the most artistic souls, the ones who sit in cafes for hours and speak in thoughtful pauses, must eventually return somewhere. A broadly accepted historical reality is that many residents in Vienna at this time lived in rented rooms rather than owning entire apartments, especially those at the beginning of their careers. You're about to learn why. A small sign catches your eye. The lettering is neat but not extravagant, offering furnished rooms for rent. You pause in front of the building, studying the doorway. It is not grand, but it is well kept. The stone around the entrance has been worn smooth by years of hands and footsteps. You step inside. The air changes immediately. Outside, the morning carried a mix of scents and movement. Inside, everything feels contained. The hallway is dimmer, cooler, with a faint smell of polish and old wood. Your footsteps sound louder here, though no one appears to be watching. Still, you find yourself moving more carefully, as if the building itself expects a certain level of quiet respect. A woman appears at the end of the corridor, her posture straight, her expression neutral but not unkind. She looks at you for a moment before speaking, her tone measured. There is a rhythm to the exchange, a pattern that feels practiced. You explain your need for a room and she nods already, turning to lead you upstairs before you have quite finished your sentence. The room she shows you is modest, a bed neatly made, a small table, a chair positioned near the window. The window itself looks out onto a courtyard where the morning light reaches only partially, leaving half the space in shadow. It is not the grand view of the Ringstrasse, but it feels steady, dependable. You can imagine returning here at the end of the day, removing your coat, sitting quietly for a moment before the city's sounds fade into the background. You run your hand lightly along the table. The surface is smooth worn by use rather than neglect. Everything in the room suggests function first, comfort second, and decoration somewhere further down the list. A curious detail from this period is that many landlords provided furniture not out of generosity, but because it allowed them to maintain control over the space and the tenant. It is easier to rent a room than an empty apartment, especially in a city where people come and go with changing ambitions. You agree to take the room. The exchange is brief, almost formal. Payment, a few instructions, a key placed into your holds your hand with quiet finality. The woman nods once more before leaving you alone. The door closes with a soft click that feels more significant than it should. You stand still for a moment, not because you are unsure, but because the stillness itself feels like part of the experience. The city outside continues. You can hear it faintly through the window. But here inside this small space, everything pauses. You place your belongings down carefully as if aware that this room will now hold a small part of your routine. You glance at yourself in the mirror above the table. It is not particularly large, but it reflects enough to remind you that appearance matters here. In Vienna, clothing is not just practical, it is a signal, a way of placing yourself within the social fabric of the city. You think back to the people you saw earlier, their measured movements, their careful presentation. It was not accidental. You adjust your collar slightly, even though no one is watching. There is a quiet understanding that respectability is something you maintain at all times, not just in public spaces. Scholars continue to debate whether this emphasis on outward appearance was driven more by genuine social values or by the pressure of living in such a visibly stratified society. Either way, you can feel its influence, already subtle but persistent. From the courtyard below you hear voices, not loud, just present. Someone speaking while carrying something heavy. Another voice responding briefly. A door opening, then closing again. These sounds do not interrupt the silence of your room. They shape it, giving it a quiet structure. You move toward the window and open it slightly. The air that enters is cooler now, carrying a faint trace of damp stone and something metallic, perhaps from nearby tools or carts. It is not unpleasant. It is simply real. For a moment you imagine the lives unfolding around you in this building. Other rooms, other routines. Someone practicing scales on a piano somewhere above or below. A servant moving quickly along a corridor. A tenant preparing to leave for work, adjusting their coat in front of their own mirror just as you did. The thought settles gently. You are not alone here, even in your quiet room. You are part of a larger pattern, one that extends beyond this building, beyond this street, into the wider rhythm of Vienna itself. You step back from the window and sit in the chair. It creaks softly beneath your weight, a small reassuring sound. The room does not resist you. It accepts you as it has accepted many others before. You take a slow breath. Outside the city continues to wake, but here you have found a place to return to. A place that will anchor your movements, however loosely, within the structure of daily life. You rise again after a moment, already feeling the pull of the streets of the cafes you glimpsed earlier, of the music and conversation that seem to wait just beyond your door. You leave the room as you found it neat, composed, and step back into the corridor, carrying with you a slightly clearer understanding of how this city holds together. And as you descend the stairs, you begin to sense that in Vienna, even the smallest spaces are part of something larger, something carefully balanced between order and quiet ambition. You step back out onto the street with a quieter sense of direction now, as if the simple act of having a room has anchored you just enough to notice more. The morning has moved forward while you are inside. The light is stronger, though still gentle, and the streets feel more awake without becoming hurried. Vienna seems to prefer a gradual unfolding rather than any sudden rush into activity. The first thing you notice is the sound. It is no longer just a background hum, it has texture now. Wooden wheels roll over stone in uneven rhythms. Hooves strike the pavement with a steady, almost comforting repetition. Somewhere close, a metal latch clicks into place, followed by the soft scrape of a door being pulled shut. Each sound arrives clearly, then fades, leaving space for the next. You begin walking without a fixed destination, letting the street guide you. The air carries a warmth that was not there before, though it is still mixed with cooler traces of morning. You catch the scent of bread again, stronger this time, and you follow it almost instinctively. It leads you to a bakery. The doorway is open, and the interior glows with a soft golden light that contrasts with the pale daylight outside. Inside, shelves are lined with loaves, rolls, and pastries arranged with a care that feels almost artistic. A widely recognized historical detail is that Vienna had a long tradition of baking with bread and pastries, forming a central part of daily life across social classes. As you step closer, you realize that this is not simply food. It is routine comfort and a small daily ritual that connects people to one another. A woman stands at the counter speaking quietly with the baker. Her voice is low measured, as if even conversation should not disturb the calm of the morning. You wait your turn, noticing how the baker moves. His gestures are efficient but unhurried. He selects a loaf, wraps it in paper, and places it gently on the counter as if it deserves respect. When it is your turn, you ask for something simple. The exchange is brief, coins change hands. A small roll is passed to you, still warm. The heat lingers through the paper, subtle but noticeable. You step back outside. The first bite is soft, slightly crisp at the edge, with a warmth that spreads slowly. It is not dramatic. It does not need to be. It feels like something that belongs exactly where it is, part of the morning rather than separate from it. You continue walking, eating slowly, watching. A milk cart rattles past bottles, clinking softly with each movement. The driver sits forward, guiding the horse with practiced ease. A young boy walks alongside, carrying smaller containers, his pace quicker, more energetic. There is a rhythm to their work, one that does not draw attention, but supports everything around it. A curious lesser-known detail is that many deliveries in Vienna at this time relied on early morning coordination, with milk, bread and newspapers arriving in overlapping routes that kept the city supplied without creating visible chaos. Watching it now, you can see how it works. Each movement fits into a larger pattern, like pieces of a composition that only makes sense when heard together. You turn onto another street, slightly busier now. Newspaper sellers stand at corners, their voices calling out headlines in tones that carry just enough urgency to attract attention without breaking the city's calm. You see men stopping briefly, purchasing a paper, then folding it neatly under one arm as they continue walking. The act feels practiced, almost automatic. You notice something else. People rarely eat while walking. You are doing it now, but you become aware that it sets you slightly apart. Most carry their purchases carefully, waiting until they are seated, or at least pause before taking a bite. It is a small detail, but it speaks to the city's preference for order, even in something as simple as breakfast. You slow your pace, not because you must, but because it feels appropriate. You find yourself matching the movement of those around you, adjusting without quite deciding to do so. It is as if Vienna gently reshapes your habits the longer you remain within it. At a nearby doorway, a porter lifts a crate from a cart and carries it inside with steady strength. His coat is worn, his movements direct. There is no ceremony here, only effort. Yet even this fits within the same quiet structure you have been noticing since you arrived. A commonly accepted observation about cities like Vienna is that their visible elegance depends on layers of labour that remain mostly unnoticed. Standing here, watching the porter disappear into the building, you can feel that truth more clearly than before. You move on. The streets continue to fill, but not in a way that overwhelms. It is a gradual increase, a layering of presence rather than a sudden crowd. Conversations remain soft. Movements remain measured. Even the occasional laughter you hear feels contained, as if shaped by the same invisible boundaries that guide everything else. You pass a small stall selling fruit. The colours stand out against the muted tones of the street. Apples, pears, something darker that catches the light. The vendor arranges them carefully, adjusting their position by small increments. It is not just about selling, it is about presentation. You pause briefly, watching. There is a patience here that feels almost unfamiliar. No one rushes the vendor, no one demands speed. Transactions happen when they happen, each one given just enough time to feel complete. Historians continue to discuss whether this slower urban rhythm was a reflection of cultural values, or simply the result of practical limitations before modern technology accelerated daily life. As you stand there, it feels less like a limitation and more like a choice, even if it was not always consciously made. You finish your bread. The last bite is smaller, cooler now, but still satisfying. You fold the paper carefully, noticing how even this small action feels shaped by the environment around you. You do not discard it immediately. You hold it until you find a proper place, a bin set discreetly along the street. Another small adjustment, another quiet alignment with the city. You begin to notice that the morning's not just something you observe. It is something you participate in whether you intend to or not. Your pace, your posture, even the way you hold a piece of paper begins to shift. And somewhere ahead, just beyond the next turn, you catch a glimpse of something familiar. Marble tables, wooden chairs, a doorway that opens not just into a room, but into a different kind of space entirely. You recognize it from earlier. The café. You feel its pull more clearly now, as if everything you have experienced this morning has been gently guiding you toward it. You take a few more steps slower again, allowing the moment to stretch slightly, knowing that once you enter, the rhythm will change in a new way. And as you approach, the sounds of the street soften just enough for you to hear something else waiting inside. A quieter world. One that asks you not to move, but to stay. Stay. You pause just outside the cafe, not out of hesitation, but because something about the doorway invites a slower approach. The street behind you continues its steady rhythm, yet here at the threshold that movement seems to soften. The sound of hooves and wheels fades slightly, replaced by something quieter, more contained. You step inside. The shift is immediate, though not abrupt. The light changes first. Outside it was pale and open. Inside it is warmer, filtered through tall windows and reflected off polished surfaces. Marble tabletops catch the glow and hold it gently, while dark wooden chairs absorb it, creating a balance that feels deliberate, almost composed. The air carries a different set of scents. Coffee rich and slightly bitter. A hint of tobacco lingering, but not overwhelming. Something sweet, perhaps pastries resting somewhere out of view. It's not a crowded smell. It is layered, each element present but restrained. You stop just long enough to take it in. Around you people are already seated, though no one seems hurried. Some lean over newspapers, their faces partially hidden, behind wide pages. Others sit with cups placed carefully in front of them, untouched for the moment, as if the act of sitting matters just as much as the act of drinking. A well-established historical observation is that Viennese coffee houses functioned as social and intellectual hubs where individuals could spend hours reading, writing, or simply observing without pressure to leave. You can feel that immediately. There is no sense of urgency here, no expectation that you will finish quickly and move on. A waiter approaches. His movements are quiet, practiced, almost effortless. He does not rush, yet he arrives at exactly the right moment, as if guided by an internal sense of timing. His attire is formal, his posture upright. He acknowledges you with a slight nod that feels both welcoming and measured. You choose a table near the window. The chair slides back with a soft sound as you sit. The marble surface is cool beneath your hand, smooth in a way that suggests years of use rather than recent polish. You place your hands there for a moment, grounding yourself in the space. The waiter stands beside you waiting. There is no pressure in his presence, only patience. You order coffee, something simple, and he nods again before moving away with the same quiet precision. You look around more carefully now. At the table beside you, a man turns a page of his newspaper with slow, deliberate movements. The paper itself is large, almost unwieldy, yet he handles it with ease, folding it just enough to read comfortably. Another figure sits further back, writing in a notebook, pausing occasionally to stare into the distance as if searching for a thought that has not quite formed. A lesser known but charming detail is that many cafes provided a wide selection of newspapers from across Europe, allowing patrons to read international news without ever leaving their seat. You notice a rack near the wall filled with neatly arranged papers held on wooden rods. Each one waits to be chosen, unfolded, and absorbed into the quiet rhythm of the room. Your coffee arrives. The cup is placed gently in front of you, accompanied by a small glass of water. The arrangement feels intentional, balanced. You wrap your fingers around the cup, feeling the warmth spread slowly into your hands. You do not drink immediately. Instead, you watch. There is a particular stillness here, though it is not empty. It is filled with small movements, subtle gestures that repeat in quiet patterns. A spoon stirring lightly against porcelain, the soft rustle of paper, the faint scrape of a chair being adjusted. You take a sip. The taste is strong, slightly bitter, but smooth. It lingers just long enough to feel complete before fading. It does not demand attention, it invites it. You begin to understand something. This is not just a place to drink coffee. It is a place to exist, to occupy time without needing to justify it. Conversations happen, but quietly. Thoughts unfold, but without interruption. Even silence here feels purposeful. Academic perspectives continue to explore whether the coffeehouse culture of Vienna encourage creativity directly, or whether it simply provided the conditions in which creative work could emerge more easily. Sitting here now, it feels less like a question and more like an experience. The space does not force ideas. It allows them. You glance at the newspaper rack again. After a moment, you rise slightly and select one. The paper is heavier than you expected, the print dense, the columns tightly arranged. You return to your seat and unfold it, carefully aware that the act itself carries a certain etiquette. You read, though not with urgency. Your eyes move across the page, absorbing fragments of information rather than seeking a complete understanding. Politics, culture, announcements. The details matter, but not in a way that demands immediate reaction. Around you, others do the same. No one seems in a hurry to finish. The reading is part of the experience, not a task to be completed. You set the paper down after a while, folding it neatly. The coffee is still warm. You take another sip, slower this time, letting the taste settle more fully. Outside the window, the street continues its steady movement, but it feels distant now, softened by the glass and the atmosphere of the room. You realize that time behaves differently here. It stretches slightly, not enough to feel unnatural, but enough to notice. Minutes pass without the usual markers. There is no clock visible, no obvious signal urging you forward. You are simply here. A man at a nearby table leans back, closing his eyes for a moment, his hands resting loosely on the arms of his chair. No one interrupts him. No one questions it. Rest, even in public, seems to be accepted as part of the rhythm. You feel your own posture change. Your shoulders relax, your breathing slows. The pace of your thoughts adjusts to match the environment around you, and without quite deciding to, you allow yourself to remain. The cafe holds you there, not through force, but through a quiet understanding that there is nowhere else you need to be at this exact moment. You take one more sip of coffee, then rest your hand lightly on the table. The marble is still cool, steady beneath your fingers, and as you sit surrounded by the soft sounds of reading, writing, and quiet presence, you begin to sense that this place will become more than just a stop along your day. It will become part of your routine, part of your rhythm, a space where the outside world continues but does not intrude. You settle a little deeper into your chair, letting the room shape your stillness, knowing that in Vienna, sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply remain where you are. You remain seated, though your awareness begins to sharpen in a new way. The stillness of the cafe is not empty at all. It is structured, almost guided, and you start to notice that your place within it depends on more than simply sitting quietly. The waiter returns not to interrupt but to observe. He pauses just long enough to glance at your cup, measuring how much remains. There is no direct question, no spoken prompt, yet you understand that this is part of an unspoken system. You can stay here for hours, that much is clear, but you must participate in the rhythm that sustains the space. You take another sip, not out of thirst, but as a quiet acknowledgement. He nods almost imperceptibly and moves on. You begin to notice how others manage this balance. At a nearby table, a man who has clearly been here longer than you lifts his cup slowly, even though it seems nearly empty. He drinks, sets it down, then signals lightly. Within moments, a fresh cup appears, placed in the exact same spot as if nothing has changed at all. A widely accepted historical detail is that patrons in Viennese cafes could linger for extended periods, but it was customary to continue ordering at intervals, maintaining a subtle exchange that justified their presence. Watching it unfold around you, it feels less like a rule and more like a shared understanding. You glance toward the waiter again. This time you raise your hand slightly. He arrives with without delay. Your order is simple, another coffee and perhaps something small to accompany it. The words are few, the tone calm. He acknowledges you with that same composed nod and disappears once more into the quiet flow of the room. You begin to see that the cafe operates on layers of hierarchy, though none of it is announced. The waiters move with authority, yet without drawing attention to it. Regular patrons seem to occupy their spaces with a kind of quiet confidence, as if the room has already accepted them. Newcomers like yourself learn by observation, adjusting gradually until your presence feels natural. There is a particular elegance in this. A small but fascinating detail is that waiters in Viennese cafes often held their positions for many years, sometimes becoming well-known figures in their own right, recognized by regular guests and trusted to maintain the atmosphere of the establishment. You can sense that continuity here. The waiter who serves you is not just performing a task, he is part of the structure that holds the space together. Your second coffee arrives. This time you notice the placement more carefully. The cup is set down with precision, aligned with the edge of the table, the handle angled slightly toward you. The glass of water sits beside it, waiting. You thank him softly. Hey. He inclines his head and moves on. You reach for the cup again, but pause before drinking. Instead, you observe the table itself. The marble surface reflects a faint outline of your hand, slightly blurred, as if the image is not meant to be entirely clear. You wonder briefly how many people have sat here before you. How many conversations, how many ideas, how many quiet moments have passed across this same surface? Scholars continue to examine whether these cafes truly shaped the intellectual life of Vienna, or simply reflected it, acting as mirrors rather than engines of creativity. Sitting here now, it feels like both. The room does not demand brilliance, but it makes space for it. At the far end of the cafe, two men speak in low voices. You cannot hear the words, only the rhythm. One speaks, the other listens, then responds. Their gestures are restrained, their expressions thoughtful. It is not an argument. It is something slower, more deliberate. Nearby, another figure sits alone writing again. You notice how still he remains between movements, as if each word requires a pause before it can be placed on the page. The act of writing here is not rushed. It unfolds at the same pace as everything else. You take a sip of your coffee. The warmth spreads again, familiar now. You realize that even your own movements have changed. You no longer reach quickly. You no longer shift in your seat without thinking. Each action feels slightly more considered, shaped by the environment around you. A quiet exchange happens at the next table. A man places a few coins beside his cup, not enough to leave, just enough to acknowledge the service he has received so far. The waiter passes by, collects them without comment, and continues. It is a small gesture, but it carries meaning. You begin to understand that tipping here is not simply about payment. It is part of the conversation, a way of maintaining balance between guest and host without ever speaking directly about it. You glance toward the door. New patrons enter, pausing briefly as you did, adjusting to the atmosphere before choosing their seats. Others leave, rising slowly, placing coins, offering a nod, then stepping back into the brighter world outside. The cafe absorbs these movements without disruption. Nothing feels hurried. Nothing feels delayed. Everything continues. You lean back slightly in your chair. The wood supports you with a quiet firmness, neither too rigid nor too soft. You let your hands rest on the arms, your posture easing further into the space. There is no expectation pressing against you. You can stay. You can read. You can think. Or you can simply sit, letting the layered sounds and subtle rhythms carry you along. You take another sip, then set the cup down gently. The faint clink of porcelain against marble blends into the background, joining the soft chorus of the room. And as you sit there, surrounded by this quiet structure of gestures, glances, and unspoken agreements, you begin to feel that you are no longer just observing the cafe. You are part of it. Your presence, your movements, even your pauses have been folded into the larger pattern as seamlessly as the sound of a spoon stirring in a cup or the turning of a page. You remain there a while longer, not measuring the time, not needing to. Because here in this carefully balanced space, time does not need to be counted. It only needs to be experienced. You leave the cafe more slowly than you entered it, as if stepping back into the street requires a small adjustment. The light feels brighter now, the sound slightly sharper, though nothing has truly changed. It is your awareness that has shifted, tuned by the quiet patterns of the room you have just left. You walk with a calmer pace, letting the city return to you in layers. The marble tables and measured gestures linger in your mind, but ahead of you another world begins to reveal itself. It is less public, more contained, hidden behind doors that close firmly and windows that reveal only fragments. You follow the faint sound of music. At first, it is barely noticeable. A sequence of notes repeated again and again, not for performance but for practice. You move toward it, guided by curiosity, until you reach a building that looks much like the others from the outside. Tall, composed, unremarkable at a glance. Inside it is different. The hallway carries sound more clearly. Each note seems to travel along the walls, soft but persistent. You climb the stairs, the sound growing slightly louder with each step until you reach a door that stands just slightly ajar. You pause. Then gently you look inside. A young student sits at a piano, back straight, hands moving carefully across the keys. A teacher stands nearby, watching closely, saying little. The student repeats the same passage again and again, each time with small adjustments, as if searching for something just out of reach. A well-established fact is that Vienna in this period was a centre of rigorous musical education, where students often trained intensively from a young age, under the close supervision of teachers who emphasized discipline as much as talent. Watching this scene, you can feel that discipline in every movement. The teacher speaks softly, a correction brief and precise. The student nods and begins again. There is no frustration in the room, only focus. The repetition is not tedious. It is purposeful, each attempt building quietly on the last. You step back slightly, not wanting to intrude. As you continue along the corridor, you hear other sounds emerging from behind closed doors. A violin, its tone wavering slightly as someone adjusts their grip. A voice practicing scales rising and falling with careful control. The building feels alive, not with conversation, but with effort. You begin to notice how different this atmosphere is from the cafe. There, time stretched outward, inviting stillness. Here, time is structured, divided into moments of practice, correction, and repetition. It moves forward steadily, guided by intention. A small but intriguing detail from this world is that many aspiring musicians in Vienna relied on private lessons held in homes or small studios rather than formal institutions, creating a network of instruction that was both personal and demanding. As you move through the building, you can see how that network takes shape. A door opens further down the hall. A young woman steps out, carrying sheet music, her expression thoughtful, but not tense. She pauses briefly, adjusting the papers in her hands, then walks past you with a quiet nod, already absorbed in what she's just learned. You continue on. At the end of the corridor, another room stands open. Inside, a different scene unfolds. An older musician sits at a piano, not practicing in the same way as the student you saw earlier. His movements are slower, less repetitive, as if he is exploring rather than refining. He plays a sequence of notes, pauses, then shifts slightly, trying something new. You listen from the doorway. The music does not follow a strict pattern. It drifts, then settles, then drifts again. It feels less like a lesson and more like a conversation, one that unfolds between the musician and the instrument itself. Researchers have long discussed whether creative breakthroughs in music emerge primarily from structured discipline or from moments of freer exploration like this. Standing here, you sense that both are present, each one shaping the other in ways that are not always visible. The musician pauses. His hands rest lightly on the keys. For a moment there is silence. Then he begins again, the notes slightly different this time, as if something has shifted in his understanding. You move on quietly, leaving him to his work. As you descend the stairs, the sounds begin to fade, blending into the quieter atmosphere of the lower floor. The building returns to stillness, though you know that behind those doors the practice continues. Back on the street, the city greets you again with its steady rhythm. You walk without urgency, carrying the memory of those rooms with you. The careful repetition, the quiet corrections, the moments of exploration. It all feels connected to what you experienced earlier. In the cafe, though, expressed in a different form. Their ideas rested. Here they are shaped. You begin to understand that Vienna holds both spaces equally, the public and the private, the still and the structured. Each one supports the other, creating a balance that allows something larger to emerge. As you pass another building, you hear a faint echo of music, again this time more distant, less defined. It lingers just long enough to remind you. The performances you will eventually see, the concerts, the applause, all of it begins here in rooms like these where no audience watches, years, and no recognition is given. Only effort, only patience, only the quiet pursuit of something that cannot be rushed. You continue walking, the sounds fading behind you, replaced once more by the layered noises of the street. And as you move forward, you carry with you a deeper sense of what lies beneath the polished surface of Vienna. A world built not only on elegance, but on discipline, repetition, and the steady shaping of skill over time. You return to the street with a slightly sharper awareness, as if the quiet discipline of those practice rooms has settled into your own movements. The city feels the same, yet not quite. You begin to notice not only what is visible, but what connects one place to another. Music, you realize, does not exist on its own here. It must pass through hands, through conversations, through agreements that are often as delicate as the melodies themselves. You follow that thought forward. The street ahead is busier now, though still measured. Carriages pass, pedestrians move in small, steady streams, and somewhere beyond the next row of buildings, you hear a faint murmur of voices gathered indoors. It is not the quiet stillness of a cafe, nor the focused repetition of a lesson. It is something else. You approach a doorway marked with modest lettering. Nothing overly decorative, yet clearly intended to be noticed by those who know what to look for. Inside, the air feels slightly warmer, carrying the scent of paper ink and polished wood. You step into a publisher's office. The room is not large, but it is carefully arranged. Shelves line the walls, filled with scores bound in muted covers. A desk sits near the window where a man reviews a stack of pages with quiet concentration. He does not look up immediately. His attention remains on the notes before him, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the paper, as if following an internal rhythm. A widely recognized historical point is that Vienna's musical life depended heavily on publishers who selected, printed, and distributed compositions, shaping which works reached audiences and which remained unseen. Standing here, you can feel that influence in the weight of the room. The man eventually looks up. His expression is neutral, neither welcoming nor dismissive. You explain your presence in simple terms and he listens without interruption. There is a pause after you finish, not uncomfortable but deliberate, as if he's measuring more than just your words. He gestures towards a chair. You sit. The silence stretches slightly before he speaks, asking a few questions, each one precise. Not about grand ideas, but about details. Where you have studied, who you have worked with, whether your compositions or your interests align with current tastes. You answer as best you can. The conversation remains calm, but you begin to sense the pressure beneath it. This is not a place for casual discussion. Decisions made here carry weight. They determine which music is printed, performed, remembered. An interesting and somewhat unexpected detail is that many composers during this time relied on a combination of publishing contracts and private support, meaning that success often depended as much on relationships as on talent alone. You can see that dynamic here, quietly embedded in the exchange. The man reviews a page you offer. His eyes move steadily across the notes. He does not rush, he does not comment immediately. When he finally speaks, his words are measured, offering neither praise nor rejection, but something in between. A suggestion, a possibility, a condition. You realize that this is how the system works. Nothing is given freely. Everything is negotiated, shaped through conversation, adjusted until it fits within the expectations of the time. Some historians continue to question whether this system encouraged creativity by providing structure, or constrained it by favouring certain styles over others. Sitting here, you feel both sides of that tension. Opportunity and limitation existing together in the same quiet space. The meeting concludes without finality. Your eyes are exchanging as polite acknowledgement, understanding that decisions here are rarely immediate. They unfold over time through further conversations, through connections that extend beyond this single room. You step back outside. The air feels cooler again, the sounds of the street returning to you in familiar layers. Yet something has shifted in your understanding. Music here is not only practiced and performed, it is managed, guided, filtered through systems that determine what reaches the public and what remains in private. You walk on the experience settling slowly. Further along, you notice a different kind of building, less formal. The door is open, and inside voices overlap in a way that feels more relaxed. You step in and find yourself in a salon, a private gathering space where a small group has assembled. Chairs are arranged loosely, not in strict rows. A piano sits against one wall, its lid open. A woman greets you with a quiet warmth. Her presence carries a certain authority, though it is expressed through hospitality rather than formality. She introduces you briefly, then returns to her conversation, allowing you to settle in without drawing attention. A young musician begins to play. The room quiets, though not completely. There is a different kind of listening here, less formal than a concert, more intimate. People shift in their seats, some closing their eyes, others watching closely. You listen. The music feels closer somehow, not distant or elevated, but shared. When the piece ends, there is no grand applause, only a soft murmur of appreciation, a few quiet words exchanged. A small but telling detail is that salons in Vienna often served as important spaces for artistic exchange, where composers could present new works in a more personal setting before larger performances. Here, ideas are tested, refined, and sometimes transformed through conversation. You notice how different this feels from the publisher's office. There, everything was measured, evaluated. Here it is explored. Thoughts are shared more freely. Opinions are offered gently, sometimes with a hint of humour, sometimes with careful consideration. The atmosphere invites participation, though it never demands it. You remain on the edge of the room observing. The woman who welcomed you speaks again this time, addressing the musician directly. Her tone is thoughtful, her comments precise but encouraging. The exchange feels collaborative, as if each voice contributes to the shaping of something larger. Researchers still debate the extent to which these informal gatherings influence the development of new musical styles, or whether they primarily reflected ideas already forming elsewhere. As you stand there, it feels less like a question of influence, and more like a process, one that unfolds gradually through shared experience. The gathering continues. Another piece is played. Another conversation begins. You find yourself drawn further in, not as a participant yet, but as someone who understands a little more than before. Vienna, you realize, is not just a place where music exists. It's a place where music moves, passing through rooms like these, shaped by people, by conversations, by decisions that are both visible and hidden. And as you eventually step back out into the street once more, you carry that movement with you. A quiet awareness that behind every performance lies a network of spaces, each one contributing in its own careful way. You return to the street again, though this time your steps carry a quieter sense of anticipation. The conversations from the salon linger in your mind, not as clear statements but as impressions, small fragments that continue to unfold even after you have left the room. You follow the direction of the music once more, but now it feels different, less hidden, more structured. The building you approach stands with a certain purpose. Its entrance is wider, its doors heavier, as if designed to hold not just sound but expectation. You step inside and find yourself in a rehearsal space. The atmosphere shifts immediately. Here there is no gentle drifting of ideas. Everything is focused, directed, and slightly tense, in a way that feels purposeful rather than uncomfortable. Rows of chairs are arranged with precision. Music stands stand upright, each one holding pages filled with notes that wait to be brought to life. Musicians are already seated, adjusting instruments, turning pages, exchanging brief glances. You take a place along the edge of the room, careful not to interrupt. A conductor stands at the front. He raises his hand, and the room stills. A well-documented historical reality is that orchestral rehearsals in Vienna during this period were often rigorous, with conductors expecting high levels of precision and discipline from every musician involved. You can feel that expectation in the air even before the first note begins. Then it starts. The sound is immediate, layered, and far less forgiving than the private practice rooms you visited earlier. There is no repetition of a single passage at first. The music moves forward, carried by many voices at once, each one required to align with the others. You listen closely. At first it feels overwhelming, not in volume but in complexity. Strings, winds, brass, each entering at precise moments, each contributing to a larger structure that is constantly shifting. The conductor interrupts. His hand cuts through the air and the sound stops almost instantly. He speaks his tone firm but controlled or dwelled. A correction. A section repeats. You begin to notice the details now. A violinist adjusts their bow slightly. A wind player takes a deeper breath before entering again. A cellist leans forward just enough to match the timing more precisely. A curious detail from this world is that rehearsals often involved not just musical correction, but subtle negotiations of interpretation where musicians and conductors work through differences in how a piece should feel, not just how it should sound. You can sense that process unfolding here, quietly embedded in each pause and restart. The music begins again. This time it holds together more tightly. You feel it. Rather than analyze it the way each part fits into the whole, the way small adjustments create noticeable shifts in the overall sound. The conductor lowers his hand. Another pause. He speaks again, softer, now refining rather than correcting. You notice the expressions of the musicians. They are focused but not rigid. There is effort here certainly, but also a kind of shared understanding. Each person listens not only to their own part, but to the others around them, adjusting in real time. Some scholars have explored whether this collective discipline is what allowed Vienna's orchestras to achieve such a distinctive sound, or whether it simply reflected broader cultural expectations of order and coordination. Watching this rehearsal, it feels like both explanations exist side by side. You shift slightly in your position, careful to remain unobtrusive. Time here moves differently again, not stretched like in the café, not divided like in the lesson rooms, but structured in cycles. Play, stop, adjust, repeat. Each cycle builds on the last, creating a sense of gradual refinement. A passage begins once more. This time it flows. The sound settles into something more cohesive, less fragmented. You feel a quiet satisfaction in the room, though no one expresses it openly. It is understood rather than announced. The conductor allows the music to continue longer now. You notice how the musicians breathe together, how their movements begin to align not just in timing but in intention. It is no longer a collection of individual efforts. It is becoming something unified. Then once again the hand rises, silence returns, a few quiet words follow. You begin to understand that this process has no clear endpoint. There is always something to refine, something to adjust, something that could be shaped just a little more carefully. You glance around the room. The space itself feels worn in a way that suggests long use. The floor bears the marks of chairs being moved, of feet shifting during long sessions. The walls carry a faint echo as if they've absorbed countless rehearsals over time. Another small but telling detail is that rehearsal spaces like this were often less grand than the concert halls where the music would eventually be performed, emphasizing function over appearance. What matters here is not how the room looks, but how it sounds. The rehearsal continues. You find yourself listening more easily now, your ear adjusting to the complexity, your attention following the subtle changes from one cycle to the next. At one point the music swells slightly, not loudly, but with a sense of direction that feels intentional. You feel it, not as a dramatic moment, but as a quiet alignment where everything seems to fall into place, even if only for a brief time. The conductor lets it pass without comment, then stops the group again. There is always more to do. As you watch, you begin to see how this space connects to the others you have visited. The cafe where ideas rest, the lesson rooms where skills are built, the salons where thoughts are shared, and here where everything is tested against the reality of performance. You remain there for a while longer, letting the cycles continue, letting the sound shape your understanding. Eventually you step back, moving quietly toward the door. The music continues behind you, fading slightly as you return to the hallway, then to the street beyond. Outside, the city feels familiar again. But now when you hear even the faintest echo of music drifting from a window or a distant building, you understand more of what lies behind it. Not just inspiration, not just talent, but repetition, correction, and the steady, patient work of bringing many voices into one. You walk on, carrying that sound with you, knowing that somewhere in rooms, just like the one you left, the process continues without pause. You leave the rehearsal hall with the sound still echoing faintly in your mind, each section of the orchestra lingering as a memory rather than a performance. The street greets you again, steady and composed, though now you sense that everything you hear carries a deeper layer beneath it. Ahead of you, the buildings begin to shift once more. They rise taller, more ornate, their entrances framed with sculpted stone and wide steps that suggest something formal, something intended to be seen as much as experienced. You already know where you are heading, even before you see the full facade. The opera house stands before you. Its presence is unmistakable. The arches, the statues, the careful symmetry all speak in the same quiet but confident tone you noticed earlier on the Ringstrasse. A well-established historical fact is that the Vienna State Opera was one of the central institutions of cultural life in the city, hosting performances that attracted audiences from across the empire. You approach slowly, not because you must, but because the building seems to ask for it. The steps are wide, the stone worn just enough to suggest years of use. You move upward, joining a small flow of people entering for the evening. Inside, the atmosphere changes again. The light is softer here, but richer. Chandeliers hang above their glow, reflected in polished surfaces that seem designed to catch and multiply it. The air carries a faint scent of perfume fabric and something older, something settled into the walls over time. You pause just beyond the entrance. Voices surround you, though they remain controlled, never rising too high. Conversations drift past in fragments, greetings, observations, small exchanges that feel both casual and carefully measured. You notice the clothing immediately. Men in dark coats, their posture upright, their movements deliberate. Women in dresses that move gently as they walk, fabrics catching the light in subtle ways. Everything feels considered, each detail part of a larger presentation. You adjust your own posture slightly. Not consciously, but in response to the space around you. You move toward the seating areas following the flow of others. The interior opens before you, revealing rows upon rows of seats, balconies rising above each level, offering a different perspective. You find your place. Not among the most prominent seats, but not hidden entirely either. From here, you can see the stage clearly, though the distance softens until just enough to create a sense of separation. A curious and often mentioned detail is that opera houses like this one were not only about the performance itself, but also about social visibility, where audiences observed one another as much as they watched the stage. As you settle into your seat, you begin to notice that dynamic unfolding around you. People glance across the rows, not openly, not in a way that would draw attention, but with quiet awareness. Who is present matters. Where they sit matters. Even the timing of their arrival carries a subtle meaning. You look toward the higher galleries. There the atmosphere shifts again. The seating is tighter, the arrangement more crowded. The clothing is simpler, the posture less formal. Yet the attention directed toward the stage feels just as focused, if not more so. Historians have long discussed how opera audiences in Vienna reflected the broader social structure of the city, with different classes occupying different spaces within the same building. Sitting here, you can see that structure clearly, though it unfolds without tension, at least on the surface. The lights dim slightly. A quiet signal passes through the room. Conversations soften, then fade. The orchestra begins. You recognize the sound immediately though it feels different here than in the rehearsal hall. It is fuller, more cohesive, no longer interrupted by pauses or corrections. The work you witnessed earlier has settled into something complete. The curtain rises. The stage reveals a carefully constructed world, one that exists only for the duration of the performance. The singers move with precision, their voices carrying across the space with a clarity that feels almost effortless. You listen. The music surrounds you, filling the room without overwhelming it. Each note seems to find its place, each phrase unfolding with a sense of direction that feels inevitable. You glance briefly at the audience. Some watch the stage with complete focus, their expression still, their attention unwavering. Others divide their attention, occasionally shifting, occasionally observing those around them. A lesser-known but intriguing detail is that some regular attendees treated the opera as a social routine, attending, frequently not only for the music but for the experience of being present within this shared space. You return your focus to the stage. The story unfolds, carried by voices that rise and fall, supported by the orchestra beneath. The performers move within their roles, their gesture measured, their expressions carefully shaped to reach even the furthest seats. You feel the connection between this moment and everything you have seen earlier. The practice rooms, the salons, the rehearsal hall, all of it leads here. The performance continues. Time passes, though it feels less noticeable now. The structure of the music guides you, each section flowing into the next, creating a sense of continuity that holds your attention without demanding effort. At one point, a voice rises above the others. Clear, sustained. You feel the room respond not with sound, but with a shared stillness, as if everyone present recognizes the moment at the same time. Then it fades. The orchestra carries the music forward once more. You sit back slightly, letting the sound settle around you. The seat beneath you is firm, supportive, designed for long periods of stillness rather than comfort in the modern sense. You do not shift. You remain, because here movement feels unnecessary. The performance continues to unfold, each moment building quietly on the last, until you begin to sense that this experience, like the city itself, is not about any single moment, but about the accumulation of many. And as you sit there, surrounded by music, light, and the quiet presence of others, you begin to understand that Vienna does not separate art from life. It weaves them together, so that even as you watch, you're also part of what is being created. A shared experience shaped by countless small details, each one contributing to the whole. The music carries on, and you remain listening, watching, allowing yourself to be held within it. You step back out into the night with the final notes still lingering somewhere behind you, as if the opera has followed you into the open air but softened itself along the way. The city feels different now. The daylight restraint has eased, replaced by a quieter kind of freedom that arrives after dusk. Gas lamps glow along the street, their light steady but not harsh. Shadows gather between buildings, stretching gently across the pavement. The rhythm of hooves and wheels continues, though it seems less frequent, leaving more space between each sound. You walk without urgency. There is no need to hurry anywhere. The evening has its own pace, slower, more fluid, shaped by leisure rather than obligation. Ahead you hear music again, though this time it is lighter. Not the layered complexity of the opera, not the disciplined structure of rehearsal, but something more immediate. A melody that repeats, inviting rather than demanding. You follow it. The building you approach is less imposing than the opera house, though still lively. Light spills from its windows, accompanied by the faint sound of laughter and conversation. You step inside and find yourself in a dance hall. The atmosphere shifts at once. The air is warmer, filled with movement. People gather in small groups, some seated at tables, others already moving across the floor. The music flows steadily, carried by a small ensemble positioned near one side of the room. A widely recognized historical point is that the waltz was a defining feature of Viennese social life during the 19th century, shaping not only entertainment but also social interaction and courtship. You can see that influence here not as a distant tradition, but as something actively lived. Couples begin to move. The pattern is simple at first glance, yet precise. Steps align, turns follow one another in smooth succession, and the movement of one pair blends into the movement of others around them. You stand at the edge of the floor watching. There is a grace to it though. Not everyone moves with the same confidence. Some glide easily, their steps almost effortless. Others hesitate, slightly adjusting, finding their rhythm as they go. A small but delightful detail is that the popularity of the waltz once caused mild controversy, as its close physical proximity between dancers was considered unusually intimate for its time. Standing here now, it feels entirely natural, even expected. You notice how the room balances different energies. At the tables, people sit and talk, their voices soft but animated. On the floor, movement continues in steady cycles, each turn bringing dancers back to where they began, only to begin again. You feel the music settle into you. It is easier to follow than the opera, easier to anticipate. The repetition creates a sense of familiarity, even if you have only just arrived. A man nearby rises and offers his hand to his partner. She accepts with a small nod. They move onto the floor, joining the others, their steps quickly aligning with the rhythm. There is no announcement, no pause, the transition is seamless. You remain where you are observing. The musicians play with a quiet consistency, their focus steady, their movements less formal than those in the orchestra you saw earlier. Here the goal is not perfection in the same sense. It is continuity, maintaining the flow that allows the room to move together. Some historians have suggested that spaces like these offered a release from the more structured environments of formal culture, while others propose that they reinforce social norms through shared patterns of behaviour. Watching the dancers now, you can see both possibilities unfolding at once. You notice the details more closely, the way skirts move with each turn, catching the light, brief before settling again. The way shoes glide across the floor, producing a soft, rhythmic sound that blends with the music. The way hands meet separate and meet again in practice patterns. You take a step closer, not onto the floor, but near enough to feel the movement more directly. The air shifts slightly as dancers pass, carrying traces of perfume, fabric, and the warmth of the room. At a nearby table, a small group shares quiet laughter. Their conversation seems lighter than what you heard in the cafe, less reflective, more immediate. The evening allows for that loosening of the careful restraint that shapes the daytime hours. You begin to understand that this space serves a different purpose. It does not ask you to think deeply or observe closely. It invites you to move, to participate, to let the rhythm carry you without too much consideration. You remain still, though not detached. More detached. The music continues. Another piece begins similar yet slightly different enough to keep the movement fresh without breaking its continuity. A detail that often surprises newcomers is how long these dances could continue, with evenings stretching late into the night, sustained by music, conversation, and the simple act of being present together. You watch as one couple leaves the floor, their expressions relaxed, their movements slower now. They return to their table, taking their seats with a quiet ease. Another pair takes their place. The pattern continues. There is no clear beginning, no final ending, only a steady cycle that carries the evening forward. You feel a subtle shift within yourself. The stillness of the cafe, the discipline of the rehearsal hall, the formality of the opera, all of it seems to settle into the background, making space for this lighter rhythm. You take a slow breath. The music fills it. For a moment you consider stepping onto the floor. Not because you must, but because the invitation is there, woven into the atmosphere itself. You remain where you are, watching, listening, allowing the movement to unfold without needing to join it. Because even from the edge you can feel how this space completes the pattern of the day. Not through effort, not through structure, but through motion, through repetition that does not demand perfection, only participation. And as the music continues and the dancers turn once more across the floor, you realize that Vienna, in all its layers, does not rely on a single kind of experience. It offers harmony, each one shaping the next, each one guiding you gently further into its rhythm. You step back out into the night once more, though this time the air feels softer against your face, warmed by the hours you have spent moving through different rooms, different rhythms. The music from the dance hall lingers faintly behind you, fading with each step until it blends into the quieter sounds of the street. You walk without direction again. The city at night feels less formal, though not careless. The same order remains, but it loosens slightly, allowing space for things that would feel out of place in the morning. Conversations carry a little further. Laughter lingers a little longer. Movements are just a touch less measured. You pass beneath a row of lamps, their glow steady, casting a gentle light that softens the edges of buildings and faces alike. Shadows stretch across the pavement, shifting subtly as you move. Ahead you notice a smaller building, its windows lit but not brightly. There is no sign drawing attention, no music spilling outward, yet something about it suggests activity within. You approach and step inside. The room you enter is quieter than the dance hall but not silent. Several people are gathered, some seated, some standing, engaged in conversation that moves in low, steady tones. There is a piano in the corner, though no one is playing at the moment. The atmosphere feels more personal, less performative. You take a place near the edge, as you often do, allowing yourself to observe. A woman stands near the centre of the room, speaking to a small group. Her voice is calm, her gestures controlled, yet there is a strength in her presence that draws attention without demanding it. The others listen carefully, occasionally responding their exchanges thoughtful rather than hurried. A widely acknowledged historical point is that women in Vienna during this period often played significant roles in cultural life as teachers, performers, and hosts of salons, even while facing clear limitations in formal recognition and authority. Watching this scene, you can see that balance in practice. The woman gestures toward the piano. Another woman steps forward, her posture composed, her movements deliberate. She sits, adjusts her position slightly, and begins to play. The music is different from what you heard earlier. It is not grand, not designed to fill a large hall. It remains close to the room, shaped for the space and the people within it. Each note feels more personal, as if it is meant to be shared rather than displayed. You listen. The others listen as well, though their attention is not rigid. Some lean slightly forward. Others sit back, allowing the sound to reach them without effort. A small but intriguing detail is that many women in Vienna built musical careers through teaching and private performance rather than public recognition, creating networks of influence that were substantial even if not always visible. You begin to sense that network here, quietly active within the room. The piece ends. There is a brief pause followed by soft acknowledgement. No applause in the formal sense, just a few words, a nod, a shared understanding that the moment has been received. The conversation resumes. You notice how the tone shifts easily from music to discussion, from performance to reflection. There is no strict boundary between them. One leads naturally into the other. A man nearby offers a comment, his voice measured, his words carefully chosen. The woman who played responds, her tone equally composed. Their exchange feels balanced, though you sense that she navigates a narrower path. Her contributions weigh differently, her presence both welcomed and quietly constrained. Researchers continue to examine how women shaped Vienna's cultural landscape despite the limitations placed upon them, questioning how much influence was exercised openly and how much remained within private or semi-private spaces like this one. Standing here, you feel that complexity without needing to define it fully. You shift your attention to the room itself. The furnishings are simple yet arranged with care. Chairs placed to encourage conversation rather than separation. A small table holding glasses, a few scattered papers, perhaps notes or sheet music. Everything feels intentional, though nothing feels forced. You notice another woman speaking, now her voice slightly softer, her gestures more reserved. She describes a recent performance, her words carrying both admiration and critique. The others listen, their responses thoughtful, building on what she might have said rather than interrupting it. The atmosphere remains steady. No one dominates the room. No one withdraws entirely. Each voice finds its place. You realize that this space functions differently from the café, from the rehearsal hall, from the opera. Here the focus is not on hierarchy or perfection. It is on exchange, on the quiet sharing of ideas, experiences and perspectives that might not find the same space elsewhere. You remain at the edge, though you feel less like an outsider now. The rhythm of the room has begun to include you even if you have not spoken. A glass is offered to you. You accept it with a small nod, the gesture simple, the inclusion unspoken but clear. You take a sip. The taste is mild, something light, not meant to distract from the conversation but to accompany it. The evening continues in this way. Music, then words, observation, then response, each element bending into the next without clear separation. You feel the pace of your thoughts slow slightly, aligning with the tone of the room. There is no need to reach conclusions quickly. Ideas can remain open, allowed to settle over time. Eventually you step back toward the door, not because the moment has ended, but because you sense that it continues without needing you to remain. You step outside once more. The night has deepened. The streets are quieter now, though not empty. A few figures pass, their footsteps soft, their presence brief. You walk on, carrying with you the quiet strength of that room, the sense of voices meeting, shaping and supporting one another within the limits and possibilities of their time. And as you move forward, you begin to understand that Vienna's cultural life is not only built on grand stages and formal recognition, it also lives in smaller spaces, in rooms like the one you have just left, where influence moves quietly, where presence matters even when it is not fully acknowledged, and where in the soft exchange of music and conversation something lasting is still being created. You move on through the night, though. Your steps feel softer now, shaped by the quiet exchanges you have just witnessed. The streets stretch ahead in long, gentle lines, their edges defined by the lamplight and shadow. The city has not fallen silent, but it has lowered its voice. As you walk, the buildings begin to shift again. The grand facades give way to streets that feel more lived in, more layered. The windows are closer together, the doors more frequently used. You hear voices not from formal gatherings, but from within homes, drifting outward in fragments that fade as quickly as they appear. You follow a street that narrows slightly. The air changes. There is a faint scent of cooking, something warm and familiar mixed with the cooler traces of night air. Somewhere nearby, a door opens and you catch a glimpse of a hallway lit by a single lamp, a figure passing through before it closes again. You continue forward. The sounds here are different, less structured, more varied, a child's voice briefly heard before being hushed. The clatter of dishes, the soft rhythm of footsteps moving above you, then stopping, then moving again. A broadly accepted historical reality is that Vienna in this period was home to a large and vibrant Jewish community, many of whom played central roles in the city's cultural, intellectual and economic life. As you walk through these streets, you begin to sense that presence not through grand displays, but through the texture of daily living. You pass a small shop, its interior still lit. Inside, a man arranges items on a shelf with careful attention. The objects themselves are simple, yet placed with precision. He pauses, occasionally stepping back to look, then adjusting something by a small degree. A modest but revealing detail is that many Jewish families in Vienna operated small businesses, contributed to the everyday functioning of the city while also participating in its broader cultural life. You can see that balance here in the quiet focus of the man at work. You move on. Further along, you notice a group gathered near a doorway. Their conversation is soft but animated. The tone carries a mix of familiarity and thoughtfulness, as if the discussion has been unfolding over time rather than beginning here. You catch fragments, references to music, to ideas, to events beyond this street. You do not linger long enough to understand fully, but you sense the depth beneath it. You turn another corner. The street opens slightly, revealing a building that stands out not for its size, but for its atmosphere. The windows glow with a steady light, and as you approach, you hear voices within, layered, but controlled, accompanied by the faint rustle of paper. You step inside. The room is lined with books. Shelves rise along the walls, filled with volumes that vary in size and age. Tables are scattered throughout, some occupied by individuals reading, quietly, others by small groups engaged in low conversation. The air carries the scent of paper ink and something older, something that has settled into the space over time. You move slowly between the tables. No one looks up immediately. The focus here is as inward, directed toward the pages, the thoughts, the quiet exchanges that unfold without being to be announced. A commonly acknowledged observation is that Jewish intellectual circles in Vienna contributed significantly to the city's cultural and academic life-shaping discussions that extended far beyond their immediate communities. Standing here, you can feel that influence not as a grand statement, but as a steady presence. You pause near a table where two individuals sit facing one another. Their conversation is quiet but intense in a way that suggests careful thought rather than urgency. One speaks, the other listens, then responds, their words measured, their expressions focused. You do not hear the details, but you feel the rhythm. It is different from the cafe. There the atmosphere invited observation and reflection. Here it encourages depth. You move further into the room. A man sits alone reading. His posture is still, his attention fully absorbed. He turns a page slowly as if the act itself carries weight. You notice how the light falls across the book, illuminating the text while leaving the edges of the room in softer shadow. Some historians have explored how these spaces functioned as centres of intellectual exchange, while others suggest that their influence has been overstated, shaped by later interpretations rather than contemporary recognition. As you stand there, it feels less like a question of scale and more like a matter of continuity. Ideas move here. Quietly, persistently. You select a book from a nearby shelf, not because you intend to read it fully, but because the gesture feels appropriate. You open it, scanning a few lines, allowing the words to settle briefly before closing it again. The act itself feels enough. You return the book to its place. A soft sound marks its contact with the shelf, barely noticeable, yet part of the room's quiet rhythm. You take a seat for a moment. Not to stay long, but to feel the space from within, rather than at its edge. The chair supports you with a simple firmness. The table before you holds no objects, yet it feels complete. You rest your hands lightly on its surface. Around you the room continues. Pages turn, voices murmur, thoughts unfold. You realise that this space, like the others you have visited, offers a different way of being within the city. Not through movement, not through performance, but through attention, through the quiet act of thinking, reading, exchanging ideas in a way that does not need to be visible to be significant. You rise after a while. No one stops you. No one marks your departure. You step back into the night. The air feels cooler now, the streets quieter still. The sounds of the city have softened to a gentle background, allowing your thoughts to linger more clearly. You walk on, carrying with you the sense that Vienna is not only a place of music and movement, but also of reflection, where ideas are shaped in spaces that remain just out of view. And as you continue, you begin to feel that each layer you have passed through adds something to the next, creating a city that is both complex and quietly connected, held together by rhythms that reveal themselves only to those who move slowly enough to notice. You step back into the street once more, the quiet weight of books and conversation lingering in your thoughts. The night feels deeper now, though not empty. It holds a steady presence, as if the city has settled into itself rather than withdrawn. You walk along a narrow street, one that feels less designed for display and more for use. The buildings rise close together, their windows darkened except for a few that still glow faintly. The sounds here are softer, more contained, yet more revealing in their simplicity. A door opens nearby. You glance toward it and see a woman stepping out briefly, carrying a small basket. She moves with purpose, though without urgency, crossing a short distance before disappearing into another doorway. The moment is quick, yet it leaves an impression. You continue forward, the street curves slightly, leading you into a courtyard space that feels enclosed, but not hidden. Here the sounds shift again. You hear the faint splash of water being poured, the soft brushing of fabric, the quiet rhythm of tasks that repeat daily without drawing attention. A firmly grounded historical observation notes that much of Vienna's refined public life depended on the labour of servants who worked behind the scenes, maintaining households, preparing meals, and ensuring that the visible world remained orderly. Standing here, you begin to see that hidden layer more clearly. You move further into the courtyard. A woman stands near a basin washing linens with steady practice movements. Her hands move through the water with a rhythm that feels both efficient and unhurried. Nearby, another figure carries a stack of folded cloth, placing it carefully onto a wooden surface before returning for more. The air carries a mix of scents. Soap, damp fabric, a faint trace of food being prepared somewhere beyond the walls. A small but revealing detail is that many domestic workers in Vienna lived within the households they served, often occupying modest quarters that were closely tied to their duties. You can sense that proximity here, the way work and living space blend together without clear separation. You remain at the edge of the courtyard, not intruding, simply observing. The work continues without pause. No one performs for an audience. No one marks the passage of time. Each task flows into the next, forming a quiet pattern that supports everything you have seen throughout the day. You notice how different this feels from the cafe, from the opera, from the salon. Here there is no space for lingering, no invitation to sit and reflect. The rhythm is steady, continuous, shaped by necessity rather than choice. Some researchers have explored whether this hidden labour was fully recognised by those who benefited from it, while others suggest that it remained largely invisible, accepted as part of the natural order of the time. As you stand there, it feels like both truths exist together. You watch as a young servant carries a tray across the courtyard. Her steps are careful, her focus steady. She moves quickly enough to complete her task, yet without haste that would risk a mistake. The tray remains level, the items arranged with precision. She disappears through a doorway. Moments later, another figure emerges, carrying something else, continuing the cycle. You begin to understand how this space connects to the rest of the city. The polished tables in the cafe, the ordered rooms of the opera, the gatherings in salons, all of it depends on this. On hands that work without recognition, on routines that repeat without variation. You shift your position slightly. The stone beneath your feet feels cool, the surface worn smooth by years of use. The walls around you hold the sounds within them, creating a sense of enclosure that feels both protective and limiting. You glance upward. Windows overlook the courtyard from several levels. Some are dark, others faintly lit. Behind each one, another layer of life unfolds, separate yet connected to what you see below. A door opens again. A man steps out, his clothing marking him as part of the household, though his role is not immediately clear. He pauses, exchanges a few quiet words with the woman at the basin, then moves on his path, crossing the space without disrupting its rhythm. You notice how little is spoken. Communication happens through brief exchanges, gestures, shared understanding. There is no need for extended conversation. The work itself provides structure. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier here, shaped by effort, by repetition, by the steady presence of tasks that do not pause. Yet there is also a calm within it, a sense of continuity. Nothing is rushed, nothing is delayed. Everything moves at the pace required. You begin to step back towards the entrance, not because the scene has ended, but because you understand it now in a way that does not require you to remain. As you reach the edge of the courtyard, you turn once more. The work continues, unchanged, uninterrupted, a constant beneath the shifting layers of the city. You step back into the street. The air feels lighter again, the sounds more open, yet you carry with you the awareness of what lies behind those walls, the unseen structure that supports the visible elegance of Vienna. You walk on your steps, steady, your thoughts quieter now, and as you move forward, you begin to see the city not just as a collection of places, but as a network of lives, each one contributing in ways that are not always visible, yet always essential. You leave the courtyard behind, though. Its steady rhythm remains with you, shaping the way you move as you return to the street. The night air feels cooler now, carrying a faint dampness that settles lightly against your skin. The lamps still glow, but their light seems softer, diffused by a thin layer of mist beginning to gather. You walk on. The streets open slightly, though fewer people pass by now. The evening has deepened into something quieter, more enclosed, as if the city has drawn inward after the energy of the day. Your footsteps echo more clearly, each one distinct against the stone. The air carries a different scent now. Coal smoke, not strong but present, drifting from chimneys above and settling into the spaces between buildings. It mixes with the dampness, creating a texture that feels both heavy and familiar. A commonly recognized historical reality is that Vienna, like many European cities of the time, relied heavily on coal for heating during colder months, filling the air with a constant low presence of smoke. As you breathe in, you can feel it not unpleasant but noticeable. You pull your coat slightly closer. The temperature has dropped just enough to make the warmth of indoor spaces feel more distant. You turn onto a street lined with apartment buildings, their entrances recessed, their windows mostly closed. A faint light glows behind curtains here and there, suggesting lives continuing quietly within. You pause near one doorway. Through the thick wood you can hear something faint. Voices, soft overlapping, accompanied by the occasional clink of dishes or the movement of chairs. The sounds are muted, but they carry a sense of closeness, of shared space that feels insulated from the outside world. You move on. Further along, a small shop remains open, its window lit from within. The glass has begun to fog, slightly blurring the view of the interior. You step closer. Inside, a woman arranges items on a counter. Her movements slow and deliberate. She pauses occasionally, perhaps listening to something beyond your hearing, then continues. A lesser-known detail is that during colder months, many Viennese businesses adapted their routines, closing earlier or shifting activity indoors to avoid the harsher conditions of winter evenings. You can see that adaptation here in the quieter pace, the contained energy of the space. You continue walking. The mist thickens, slightly softening the outlines of buildings and blurring the edges of light. The city begins to feel smaller, more intimate, as if the distance between places has shortened. You pass beneath another lamp. The light creates a small circle around you, beyond which the street fades into shadow. Your breath becomes visible, a faint cloud that appears and disappears with each exhale. You notice how sound behaves differently now. It travels less far, absorbed by the damp air. A distant carriage passes, but its presence is brief, its sound fading quickly. Even your own footsteps seem quieter, as if the city itself is encouraging a gentler pace. You turn into a narrow passage. The walls rise close on either side, holding the air still. Here the scent of coal is stronger, mixed with something else, perhaps the lingering warmth of heated interiors escaping through small openings. A subtle but intriguing detail is that many Viennese homes relied on tiled stoves known as Kacherlöfen, which retained heat for long periods and shaped the way indoor spaces were experienced during winter. Though you cannot see them, you can sense their presence in the warmth that seeps faintly into the night. You emerge from the passage into another street. This one is quieter still. Few lights remain in the windows. Most have dimmed or gone dark, leaving only the occasional glow to suggest that the city is still awake though resting. You walk more slowly now, not out of fatigue, but because the atmosphere invites it. The mist, the softened light, the reduced sound all combine to create a sense of calm that feels almost deliberate. Some historians have suggested that the seasonal rhythms of cities like Vienna shape not only daily routines, but also patterns of thought and social interaction, encouraging more inward reflection during colder, darker months. As you move through this quiet space, that idea feels less like theory and more like experience. You pass a bench. It is empty, its surface slightly damp from the air. You pause beside it, resting your hand briefly against the wood. It feels cool, smooth, unchanged. You do not sit. Instead, you continue. The street leads you past a series of buildings that seem to blend into one another, their detail softened by the mist. You notice how the city's grand features, so clear in the daylight, now recede into something more uniform, more subtle. You realize that Vienna does not lose its character at night. It transforms it. The elegance remains, but it becomes quieter, less about display and more about presence. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier now, yet also calming, as if it carries the weight of the day and gently settles it around you. You walk on. Each step feels deliberate, each movement a part of the same quiet rhythm that has followed you from morning to night. And as you move through the softened streets, you begin to feel that the city is not asking anything more of you now. No observation, no participation, only that you continue, gently, quietly, allowing the night to hold you within a limit. You continue through the softened streets, the mist still drifting in thin layers around the lamps, though now it begins to thin just enough for the outlines of buildings to return more clearly. The night has settled into a quieter rhythm, yet the city is not fully withdrawn. It lingers in small pockets of light and sound. Ahead you notice a cluster of figures gathered near a corner. Their voices carry just slightly enough to draw your attention without breaking the calm. You approach at an unhurried pace, letting the conversation reach you in fragments. A name is mentioned, then another. The tone is not loud, but it holds a certain energy, a quiet intensity that suggests more than casual exchange. You pause nearby, not intruding, simply allowing yourself to listen as the conversation continues to evolve. A firmly grounded observation is that Vienna's cultural circles were deeply interconnected with news opinions and reputations spreading quickly through informal networks of conversation. As you stand there, you can sense that network in motion. One of the figures leans slightly forward, speaking with careful emphasis. The others listen, their expressions attentive. There is no laughter here, no lightness, only a steady flow of words that seem to carry weight. You catch a phrase, a performance. Another phrase, a criticism. The conversation shifts. You realize that what you're hearing is not just discussion, but evaluation. Opinion forming, adjusting, spreading outward through the city, shaping how people and their work will be perceived. A curious but telling detail is that gossip in Vienna's artistic circles often functioned as an informal system of reputation management, influencing opportunities and relationships in ways that were rarely recorded but widely felt. You can see that process unfolding here quietly but clearly. You move on. The voices fade behind you, though. Their tone lingers, a reminder that even in a city of elegance and restraint, judgment moves steadily beneath the surface. You turn onto another street. This one feels slightly more active, though still calm. A few windows remain lit, their glow steady against the dark. You pass beneath one and hear voices within, softer, more relaxed. You slow your pace. Inside, a small group sits around a table. Their movements are easy, their expressions open. This is not the focused exchange you observed earlier, nor the evaluative tone of the conversation outside. This feels different, more personal. A woman speaks, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. The others respond in kind, their laughter quiet but genuine. The atmosphere is lighter, though not careless. You continue walking. The contrast settles into your awareness. Vienna holds many kinds of conversation, some that shape reputations, some that build ideas, and some that simply connect people in the moment. You pass another building. This time the voices you hear are more subdued. The tone more serious. You cannot make out the words, but the rhythm suggests something reflective, perhaps a disagreement, perhaps a careful negotiation. A number of scholars have examined how social reputation in Vienna was maintained through both formal recognition and informal discourse, suggesting that what was said in private often carried as much influence as what was presented publicly. As you move through these streets, that idea feels present in every quiet exchange. You reach a small square. The space opens slightly, offering a clearer view of the night sky, though it is partially veiled by the remaining mist. A few benches line the edges, and a single lamp stands near the centre, casting a soft circle of light. You pause there, not because you are tired, but because the stillness invites it. The sounds around you are minimal now. A distant carriage barely audible, a door closing somewhere beyond the square. The faint rustle of fabric as someone passes behind you, then continues on without pause. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler, cleaner here, as if the open space allows it to settle more evenly. You sit for a moment. The bench beneath you is firm, slightly cold but steady. You rest your hands lightly on your lap, allowing the quiet to settle around you. The conversations you have heard begin to blend together in your mind. The careful critiques, the light laughter, the serious exchanges, each one part of the same larger pattern shaping the city in ways that are not always visible yet always present. You realize that Vienna does not rely solely on grand performances or formal institutions to define itself. It is also shaped by these quieter moments, by words spoken in passing, by opinions shared in low voices, by connections formed and adjusted through conversation. You rise after a while. The square remains unchanged, its stillness undisturbed by your presence. You step back onto the street. The night continues, though it feels closer to its end now. The energy has softened further, the movements fewer, the sounds more distant. You walk on. Each step feels slower, not out of fatigue, but because the city itself has slowed, inviting you to match its pace. And as you move through the quiet streets, you begin to understand that Vienna's elegance is not only in its architecture or its music. It is in its conversation, in the subtle ways people speak, listen and respond, in the quiet shaping of ideas and reputations that happens not on stage but in moments like these. You continue forward at the echoes of those voices fading gently into the night, leaving behind a sense of connection that feels both delicate and enduring. You leave the small square behind the echo of quiet voices fading into the stillness, and continue along a street that feels broader again, though gentler than it did earlier in the day. The lamps remain their light steady, but the spaces between them seem wider now, as if the city has stretched slightly to accommodate the night. Your steps carry you toward another familiar kind of place, though this one reveals itself more through sound than sight. At first, it is only a murmur, low voices, a soft clink of glass. Then, as you draw closer, you recognize the texture of it. Not the quiet contemplation of the cafe, not the measured exchange of a salon, but something more animated, though still contained. You step inside. The air shifts immediately. It is warmer here, but not in the same way as the dance hall. The warmth feels grounded, shaped by the bodies gathered close by conversation that moves steadily but without urgency. A faint haze hangs in the air, not thick, just enough to soften the edges of the room. Tables fill the space, some occupied by pairs leaning toward one another, others by small groups engaged in overlapping discussions. The sound is layered, yet no single voice dominates. It feels like a steady hum rather than a series of separate conversations. You find a place near the wall, not to withdraw, but to observe. A widely recognized historical understanding is that cafes and similar gathering spaces in Vienna often served as informal centers of discussion where ideas about art, politics, and society were exchanged in ways that blurred the line between public and private life. This room feels like an extension of that tradition, though slightly less restrained. A man at a nearby table speaks with quiet intensity. His hands move subtly as he talks, not dramatically, but enough to emphasize certain points. The others listen occasionally, interjecting their responses measured but engaged. You catch fragments. Words about ease, about change, about the direction of something larger, though it remains just out of reach. A lesser-known yet intriguing detail is that many of Vienna's most influential ideas circulated first through conversations like these long before they appeared in formal writing or public debate. Listening now, you can sense how those ideas begin to take shape. The conversation shifts. Another voice enters, offering a different perspective. The tone changes slightly, not confrontational but firmer, as if testing the strength of what has just been said. You notice how the group responds. They do not rush to agreement. They allow space for difference, for uncertainty, for the possibility that no single answer will settle the matter. Some historians have explored whether these conversational spaces fostered genuine intellectual openness, or whether they primarily reinforced existing viewpoints within familiar circles. As you stand there, it feels like both possibilities are present, intertwined in a way that resists easy definition. You glance around the room. At another table, the tone is lighter. A small group shares a quiet joke, their laughter soft, quickly contained. Their conversation moves easily, less concerned with ideas and more with connection. Further along, a pair sits in near silence. One speaks occasionally, the other listens, their exchange minimal but meaningful. You begin to see how this space accommodates many kinds of interaction at once. Serious discussion, casual conversation, quiet companionship, each one existing alongside the others without disruption. A server moves through the room. His steps are careful, his presence unobtrusive. He places drinks, collects empty glasses, acknowledges patrons with small gestures that maintain the flow without drawing attention. You realize that even here, in a space that feels more relaxed, there is still a structure guiding everything. Not rigid, but present. You rest your hand lightly against the table beside you. The surface is worn, its texture smooth from years of use. You can imagine how many conversations have passed across it, how many ideas have begun, shifted, or ended in this very place. A voice rises slightly, then settles again. You turn your attention back to the group nearest you. The discussion has deepened. The man who spoke earlier now listens, his expression thoughtful. Another takes his place, building on what has been said, extending it, adjusting it. You sense that this is not a conversation that will end tonight. It will continue. In other rooms, at other tables, carried by the same voices or by new ones who pick up the thread. You take a slow breath. The air feels warmer here, but not heavy. It holds the presence of people, of ideas moving between them, of time being spent in a way that feels both purposeful and unforced. You notice your own stillness. You have not spoken yet, you feel included, not as a participant in the conversation itself, but as part of the space that allows it to exist. You remain for a while longer, listening, observing, letting the rhythm of the room settle into you. Eventually you step back. The conversations continue without pause, unaffected by your movement. The room holds its balance, its steady hum of voices and thought. You move toward the door. The night air meets you again as you step outside the cooler, now carrying a clarity that contrasts with the warmth you leave behind. You walk on. The sounds of the room fade, replaced by the softer, more distant rhythm of the street. And as you continue, you begin to understand that Vienna's intellectual life is not confined to any single place. It flows from cafe to salon, from private room to public space, carried by voices that rise, settle and rise again, shaping the city in ways that are both subtle and enduring. You continue along the quieter street, the hum of voices fading behind you, replaced once more by the softer rhythm of the night. The city feels as if it is nearing a pause, though not quite resting yet. A few windows remain lit, their glow steady, offering small pockets of life within the dark. Your steps carry you toward a different kind of space. Not enclosed, not hidden, open. The street widens, gradually leading you toward a market square that still holds traces of activity even at this late hour. Stalls stand in ordered rows, some already covered, others in the process of being cleared. The ground beneath your feet feels slightly uneven here, worn by countless footsteps and the steady movement of carts. You slow as you enter. The air changes again. It carries a mix of scents that feel immediate and grounded. Cooked meat bread, something slightly sweet, perhaps pastries that have not yet been taken inside. There is also the faint presence of straw, of wood, of the materials that support the visible goods. A well-documented historical fact is that markets in Vienna played a central role in supplying food to the city, connecting urban life to surrounding regions through a steady flow of produce, meat and baked goods. Standing here, you can feel that connection in the lingering traces of the day's activity. A vendor remains at one stall. He moves slowly, gathering items, arranging them into crates with a care that suggests routine rather than urgency. You approach just enough to observe without interrupting. He lifts a piece of cloth, folds it, places it aside. Then another. Each movement follows the last, forming a quiet sequence that brings the day to a close. A small but engaging detail is that some vendors would stay late to sell remaining goods at reduced prices, attracting those who preferred or needed to shop outside the busiest hours. You notice a woman nearby examining a small selection of items, her movements deliberate, her choices careful. You walk further into the square. The space feels larger at night, less crowded, its structure more visible without the press of people. You can see the arrangement of stalls, the paths between them, the way everything fits together in a pattern designed for movement and exchange. You pass a stall where a few loaves of bread remain. Their crusts catch the lamplight, creating a subtle contrast against the darker surroundings. You pause briefly considering, then continue letting the image settle into your memory. The sounds here are different from those of the street, more grounded, wood being placed against wood, a crate set down. A quiet exchange of words between two figures working side by side. No performance, no audience, only the steady conclusion of a day's work. Some researchers have suggested that markets like this provided not only goods, but also a sense of continuity, anchoring the city's daily rhythm in something tangible and reliable. As you stand here, that idea feels present in the structure of the space itself. You move toward the edge of the square. A small cart stands nearby, its contents nearly gone. The person tending it leans slightly against its side, resting for a moment before continuing to pack away what remains. You notice the wear on the cart's surface. Scratches, marks, signs of signs of long use. It feels familiar in the same way the cafe tables did, in the same way the rehearsal room floor carried the marks of repeated movement. You begin to see how these spaces connect, each one shaped by repetition, each one holding the traces of those who have passed through it. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler here, less confined by buildings, more open to the night above. You glance upward, briefly catching a faint view of the sky between the rooftops. You turn back toward the stalls. Most are now covered. The activity has slowed further, though not completely stopped. A few figures remain finishing their tasks with the same steady pace you have seen throughout the day. You walk along the final row. At the far end, a small group stands together, speaking quietly. Their conversation is brief, practical, focused on what remains to be done rather than what has already passed. You do not linger. You understand the rhythm now. The market does not end abruptly. It closes gradually, each action bringing it closer to stillness. You step out of the square. The street beyond feels quieter, more settled, as if the city has moved one step closer to rest. Behind you, the last sounds of the market continue for a moment longer, then begin to fade. You walk on. The scents of food and wood diminish, replaced by the cooler, cleaner air of the night. Your footsteps return to the steady rhythm you have come to recognize, each step part of the larger pattern that has carried you from morning to this late hour. And as you move forward, you begin to feel that the city's life is not only in its grand spaces or its cultural centers, it is here as well, in markets, in kitchens, in the quiet exchange of goods that sustains everything else. You continue along the street, the memory of the square settling gently behind you, a reminder that even as the city slows, its foundations remain steady, ready to begin again when morning returns. You move away from the market square, the last traces of activity fading into a quieter stillness that feels almost complete. The streets ahead stretch in long, calm lines, their surfaces reflecting faint light from the lamps above. The city now seems to breathe more slowly, as if settling into the final hours before rest. Your steps carry you toward a broader avenue again, though it feels different from when you first walked it in the morning. The grand facades remain, but their details are softened by shadow. The statues and columns you noticed earlier now appear less defined, their shapes blending gently into the darkness. You walk at an unhurried pace. There is no destination pressing on you, no expectation to arrive anywhere in particular. The night allows you to move simply for the sake of moving. A commonly accepted historical observation is that Vienna, as the capital of a vast empire, drew people from many regions, each bringing their own customs, languages, and ways of living into the city. As you walk now, you begin to notice subtle traces of that diversity, even in the quiet. A figure passes you, their accent noticeable in the brief greeting they offer to someone across the street. Another walks by wearing a coat cut in a slightly different style, its details hinting at a place beyond Vienna itself. These differences do not stand out sharply. They blend into the city, becoming part of its overall texture. You continue along the avenue. A carriage moves past its presence, quieter than before, its wheels producing a softer sound against the dampened street. The driver sits wrapped in his coat, his posture steady, his attention fixed ahead. You notice how the city accommodates these movements even now. Nothing feels out of place. Everything continues, though at a reduced pace. A small but interesting detail is that Vienna's position within the Austro-Hungarian Empire meant that goods, people, and ideas flowed constantly into the city, creating a cultural mixy that was both dynamic and at times quietly complex. You can sense that mixture in the small variations you observe, the subtle differences that sit alongside the familiar. You turn onto a side street. Here the quiet deepens further. Fewer lights remain. Fewer windows glow. The sounds are minimal, limited to the occasional footstep or the distant echo of a carriage far away. You walk more slowly, not because you must, but because the stillness invites it. You pass a building with a large doorway, its entrance framed by stone that feels solid and enduring. Above it, a faint light remains, casting a soft glow that barely reaches the street. You pause briefly, noticing how even in this late hour there are signs of life, small indications that the city does not fully sleep. Some scholars have reflected on how the diversity of Vienna contributed to both its cultural richness and its underlying tensions, suggesting that the coexistence of many identities within a single urban space created both opportunity and complexity. As you stand there, the idea feels present, though not fully visible, like something that exists beneath the surface. You continue on. The street leads you past another row of buildings, their windows now mostly dark. The repetition of their facades creates a sense of continuity, a pattern that extends beyond what you can see. You notice your own footsteps more clearly now, each one distinct, each one part of the quiet. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler, clearer, carrying only the faintest trace of the city's earlier activity. You begin to feel a subtle shift within yourself. The energy of the day has settled. The observation, the sounds, the movements, all of it has softened, leaving behind a calmer awareness. You reach another intersection. Here the street opens slightly, offering a longer view ahead. The lamps continue in a steady line, their light marking the path without demanding attention. You follow it. The city feels almost empty now, though not abandoned. It holds a quiet presence, as if waiting. You pass a final figure walking in the opposite direction. Their steps are slow, their posture relaxed, as if they too are simply moving through the night without urgency. You exchange a brief glance, then continue. You begin to understand that Vienna, even at its most, still remains connected. The layers you have moved through, the café, the rehearsal hall, the opera, the market, all of it exists simultaneously even when not visible. Each part supports the others. Each part continues even as the city rests. You walk on the avenue, stretching ahead, the lamps guiding your path. And as you move through this quiet space, you begin to feel that you are no longer just passing through Vienna. You are within it, carried by its motions, shaped by its pace, part of its steady unfolding life. You continue along the quiet avenue, your steps now softer than before, as if the city itself has taught you how to move within it. The lamps stretch ahead in a steady line, each one marking a small pool of light, each one separated by a gentle distance that invites calm rather than urgency. The night has reached a deeper stillness, not silent but settled. You walk without thinking about where you're going, only noticing how the space around you feels more open now, less layered with activity, more defined by presence alone. Ahead you recognize the curve of the Ringstrasse again. You have come full circle. The buildings stand as they did before, though now they appear softened, their details less pronounced, their grandeur quieter. What felt earlier like a display now feels like a memory held in stone. You step onto the wide boulevard. The openness is striking after the narrower streets. The space stretches around you, giving your movement room to unfold without interruption. A well-established historical understanding is that the Ringstrasse symbolized Vienna's transformation into a modern imperial capital, replacing old fortifications with a space designed for visibility, movement, and representation. Standing here now, that purpose feels distant, softened by the quiet of the hour. A single carriage passes. Its sound is clear, then gone. The driver does not look toward you. He continues forward, part of a rhythm that persists even in the city's calmest moments. You slow your pace further, not out of fatigue, but because there is nothing left to hurry toward. The day in all its layers has already unfolded. You pass by the familiar facade of the opera house. It stands closed now, its entrance is quiet, its interior resting after the evening's performance. The light that remains is minimal, just enough to outline its shape against the night. You pause briefly. The memory of music returns. Not as sound, but as a feeling, something that lingers even in silence. You continue on. The cafe you visited earlier appears ahead. Its windows are dim now, though not entirely dark. Inside, a few figures remain seated at tables, their movements slower, their presence more subdued than before. A small but charming detail is that some Viennese cafes remained open late into the night, allowing patrons to extend their time within that unique atmosphere long after the busiest hours had passed. You can see that here, in the quiet persistence of those who remain, you consider stepping inside, then decide not to. Not because you cannot, but because the moment feels complete without it. You walk past. The street continues. The lamps continue. The rhythm continues. You notice how everything feels both familiar and slightly changed. The places you have visited are the same, yet your understanding of them has shifted. The cafe is no longer just a room with tables. The opera is no longer just a stage. The streets are no longer just paths between buildings. They are part of a larger pattern, one that you have moved through slowly, piece by piece. Some historians have reflected on how cities like Vienna create a sense of continuity through repeated experience, while others suggest that each individual journey reshapes the meaning of those spaces in subtle ways. As you walk now, it feels as though both ideas exist together. You reach a quieter stretch of the boulevard. The space feels almost empty. The buildings stand in calm alignment, their presence steady, unchanged by the passing of hours. You take a slow breath. The air is cool, clear, carrying only the faintest trace of the city's earlier life. You begin to feel a gentle sense of closure. Not abrupt, not final, just a quiet recognition that the day has settled into its ending. You glance once more along the length of the street. The lamps fade into the distance. The shapes of buildings soften as they recede. Everything feels held within a calm, steady stillness. You turn slightly, allowing your path to shift without needing a clear destination. Because at this point, movement itself feels enough. You walk on your steps, light your awareness. Bless, calm. And as you do, you carry with you the layers of Vienna. The sounds, the spaces, the quiet connections that have revealed themselves slowly over time. Each one still present, each one part of the whole, even now. You continue along the boulevard, though now your steps feel lighter, as if the city itself has released any expectation it once held over you. The lamps guide your path, their glow steady and unchanging, while the spaces between them deepen into a calm darkness that feels gentle rather than empty. There is nowhere left to arrive, only the act of being here. You pass once more by the familiar outlines of buildings that have accompanied you throughout the day. Their forms are quieter now, their details softened, yet their presence remains steady, as if they have been waiting for this final, quieter hour. The cafe appears again, its windows dim but not entirely dark. This time you pause, you step inside. The room feels different from before, not in its still arrangement but in its mood. Fewer people remain. The air is still, the sounds minimal. A spoon touches porcelain somewhere in the distance, then rests. A page turns slowly, then settles. You choose a table without thinking. The chair greets you with the same quiet firmness, the marble table cool beneath your hand. Everything is familiar, though touched by the stillness of the late hour. A waiter approaches. The same measured movement, though softer now, less defined by routine and more by presence. You order one last coffee, your voice calm, your words few. He nods. The exchange is simple. The cup arrive? You wrap your hands around it, feeling the warmth settle into your fingers, then spread gently outward. You do not rush to drink. You sit. You breathe. A widely accepted historical note is that Vienna's café is often served as extended living rooms for their patron spaces where time could stretch beyond the structure of the day. In this quiet moment, you feel that quality more clearly than before. A small and slightly whimsical detail is that some regular visitors develop favourite tables so specific that they would wait patiently rather than sit elsewhere, forming quiet attachments to particular corners of the room. You glance around, imagining how many such preferences have shaped this space over time. You take a sip. The taste is familiar now, steady without surprise. You let it linger. Around you, the remaining patrons sit in their own quiet worlds. One leans over a newspaper, though the pace of reading has slowed. Another rests with eyes half closed, not asleep but near enough to it. You notice how the room holds them. No one is asked to leave. No one is hurried. Everything exists within a gentle allowance. Scholars have long considered whether this cafe culture encouraged reflection simply by providing time, or whether it cultivated a deeper habit of thought within those who returned again and again. Sitting here now, you feel that it does not matter which is true. The effect is real. You take another sip. The warmth has softened slightly, though it remains present. You rest your hand against the table. The marble is unchanged, steady beneath your touch, holding the quiet history of countless moments like this one. You glance toward the window. Outside, the street stretches in calm silence, the lamps marking its length with quiet precision. The city is still there, but it feels distant now, as if you have stepped slightly outside of its movement. You sit a little longer, not measuring the time, not needing to. The coffee gradually cools. The room remains. The stillness deepens. Eventually you set the cup down. The faint sound it makes blends into the quiet, then disappears. You rise. The chair returns to its place with a soft movement. You leave a few coins on the table, a small gesture that completes the exchange. The waiter acknowledges you with a slight nod. No words are needed. You step outside. The night meets you one final time. The air is cool, the street nearly empty, the lamp steady as ever. You take a few slow steps, then pause. There is nothing left to see, nothing left to understand, only the quiet presence of the city around you. You take a breath and let it out slowly. The rhythm that has carried you from morning to now begins to soften, further easing into something even gentler. The building stands in silence. The streets hold their shape. The city rests. And you find that you do not need to move any further. You simply remain for a moment. Then slowly you allow yourself to let go of the details, the sounds, the spaces, letting them fade into a softer impression, one that no longer asks for attention, only for rest. Your steps grow lighter, your thoughts quieter. The lamps blur slightly as your focus softens, and Vienna in all its layers begins to drift gently into the background, leaving behind a calm, steady stillness. You carry that stillness with you. As everything else fades, the city is settled fully now, and you feel it in the quiet spaces between each breath. There is no need to hold on to any one image. The cafe, the music, the streets, they have all found their place within you, and now they begin to soften like distant notes that no longer need to be heard clearly to be felt. You allow your awareness to rest. The cool air, once sharp against your skin, now feels gentle, almost weightless. The sounds that once guided your steps have faded into a quiet background, leaving only a calm presence that surrounds you, without asking anything in return. You imagine the city continuing in its own way even as you step away from it. The cafe doors closing softly, the last lamp dimming the streets, holding their shape in the dark. Everything remains, yet nothing demands your attention anymore. Your breathing slows, each inhale steady, each exhale soft. The rhythm is simple, now unbroken by movement or thought. You let the details drift further. The marble tables, the distant music, the quiet conversations, all of it dissolving into a gentle sense of calm that stays with you without needing to be recalled. There is no need to return to any moment, no need to follow any path. You have already moved through it all. Now you simply rest, and as the final traces of the city fade into a soft, distant stillness, you allow yourself to settle completely held in a calm that feels steady, quiet, and deeply at ease. Sweet dreams,